Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the webinar, Mechanized Trailbuilding Primer. My name is Candace Gallagher, and I am the Director of Operations and the Webinar Coordinator for American Trails. This is our 141st webinar in the American Trails Advancing Trails webinar series. And I am excited to partner with the Professional TrailBuilders Association, otherwise known as PTBA, to offer 3 webinars happening the first Thursday of October, November, and December. So this is being the 3rd and final webinar in their series. These webinars are free thanks to PTBA and the Federal Highway Administration. And this webinar is being recorded. It offers learning credits and includes real-time closed captioning in English, and a link for the closed captioning as well as the quiz will follow in the chat box if you don't already see them there. Attendees will also receive the transcript, a link to the recording in my follow-up email, and of course anyone who's requesting learning credits will get a follow-up email from me as well. And we are saving time for attendee questions at the end of the webinar, and I welcome you to send us your questions at any time during today's presentation via the questions box. Erin Kay with PTBA will actually be moderating the questions, so it is great at making sure we get those questions answered. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our webinar presenters. We have Erin Kay, who is the Executive Director of the Professional TrailBuilders Association. We have Tony Boone, who is the COO of Timberline Trailcraft. We also have Jed Talbot, who's the owner of OBP Trailworks. And we also have Joe Folker, who's the Special Operations Assassin with Single Track Trails. So I will now hand controls over to Erin to get things started.
Thanks, Candace. Thanks. Is it working? All right. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. And sorry. And we'll be talking about mechanized trail building. Our agenda today is we're going to start with the evolution and impact of mechanized equipment. And then we'll go into a little more detail on dozers, diggers, other mechanized equipment, and then we'll save time for Q&A, as Candace mentioned. Just a little bit about PTBA. PTBA is the world's only trade association for the trail industry. And all of our member companies are professionally vetted through a portfolio submission process and peer review. And we have 115 member companies worldwide. And you can see most are in North America, but we're expanding. And our members' skill sets really range from, they include trail construction, including hand and mechanized, which we're talking about today, construction management, trail design, field layout and flagging, trail master planning, bridges and boardwalks, rockwork and rigging, technical trainings and education, trail restoration and reclamation, and then also specialty trail features. So just to give you an idea of the scope of PTBA member companies, in 2020, our companies employed 1,000 trail workers who worked more than 1 million hours on trails and built more than 1,500 miles of trail, designed more than 3,000 miles of trail, and provided nearly 100 trail trainings and built 44 bike parks. Just quickly, I just wanted to share this graph because it shows the trends that we're seeing in the private trail building industry, which, as reported by our member company surveys annually, we've seen 100% growth in member company revenue in the last 10 years and 200% growth in the number of employees. And this is important because it really relates to our topic today of mechanized trail building, which truly changed our industry. And I'll hand off to Tony.
Thanks, Erin and PTBA, and thanks, Candace and American Trails and all you folks that are sitting in on this. I can't believe this is your 141st webinar. Crazy. A little bit about the history of my fascination with diggers and pushers. It all kind of started in the mid-'60s with Tonka trucks and Hot Wheels, sculpting paths in little towns in my sandbox. And it's pretty much continued decades now until today, when it's more with trail dozers, cats, and bobcats. And I gotta say, on a good day, my joy rivals that when I was 5 years old. I still love my job of digging in the dirt. So let's talk about the mechanized equipment evolution. Doing a little bit of research, it was in the mid-1960s that Jerry Morrison and his father, Frank, invented this Morrison Trailblazer here pictured to the right. Seems like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. And there's some of them that are actually still around. And then WTBA, the Western TrailBuilders Association, started in 1976, and it was mainly builders from the West Coast that weren't happy with how the U.S. Forest Service contracting practices were going. In the 70s, many excavators kind of became more popular, and after a little more research, actually just a minute ago, I found out they were invented in 1959, and then Yanmar produced the first diesel-powered mini excavator in 1968. Many trail builders began using them in the early 1980s. Trail dozers developed in the late 80s. My actual first company, Arrowhead Trails, bought our first Sweco 450 in 1994 and joined the Western TrailBuilders Association the year after in 95. As far as I can tell, we were the first one to use the actual dozer. And at that point, it's interesting to know that WTBA had only 22 members at that point in time. And we were the first ones in Colorado, which now I think Colorado has 12. WTBA eventually evolved into the Professional TrailBuilders Association in 2004, spurred on by the growth of numerous companies in southeastern U.S., which were very mechanized oriented. Thanks, Woody Keene. And now in 2000s, we have a variety of new toys. Walk behind, stand on compact utility loaders. These loaders come with a variety of attachments to dig holes, forklifts. We also now have mini excavators that are more adequately powered. Even though we still have issues at high altitude, they're much more adequate than they were in the 70s and 80s. And we also have a zero tail swing excavators by most manufacturers that allows us to work on steeper side slopes. All kinds of rubber track loaders and haulers to carry your materials and stuff almost invented new on a yearly basis. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons of essentially mechanized equipment in general. The pros are pretty obvious: faster construction rates, reduced burden on hand crews, especially in high impact tools like Picmatics, Pulaski's, and McLeod's. There's a more consistent trail tread and compaction obtained with them, and they can easily remove large obstacles efficiently. They build berms very easily, such as rolling grade dips, berms, turns, and they also require fewer volunteer hours to build your trails. There's less maintenance per mile on these trails, and most importantly with these trails, they provide a lot easier rescue and evacuation. As far as cons go, they are expensive to purchase and maintain. They also require commercial vehicle licensing to transport them, as well as insurance on the machines. The transport effort is a little bit more complicated. The machines require trained operators and regular maintenance. They also require proper safety gear, and an unskilled operator can cause significant damage to the trail and the environment in a matter of hours. This is kind of one of the lesser known ones, is if you're building a bunch of trails with your volunteers or with your contractors, you're going to decrease those volunteer opportunities, and you want to make sure to try to involve them still. One of the complaints we've had from volunteers is that they think it's less fun to follow trails built by machine than it is to do hand built, so try to take that into consideration. Next, let's talk about dozers. These dozers we're talking about are 4 foot wide or less. And the key to a dozer, as compared to other machines, that they have a 6-way blade that allows the blade to go up and down, tilt left and right, and angle left and right. And that allows you to cut nice bench cut trails on steeper side slopes with ease. Let's talk about weights and kind of productivity on these. The Sutter 300 is the smallest dozer, and we'll see some video of it in a bit. It's 29.5 inches wide, weighs 4,400 pounds, and it has 44 horsepower. The bigger dozers, both the Sweco and the Sutter, are also 48 inches wide, both of those, and they weigh 10,000 pounds and have between 85 and 95 horsepower. We also see some ASVs to a lesser extent, the RT25 and the RT40, both about 48 inches wide and around the 3,700 to 4,200 pound range with 25 to 38 horsepower. The thing about the ASV is it only offers aftermarket 6-way blades, and you can get a 60-inch wide blade. While I believe these ASVs are awesome tracked loaders, I feel they're somewhat limited to be used as a dozer unless you're in fairly loose, non-rocky materials. Let's take a look at these videos here. We're just going to see some portions of it so we can keep moving on. The first one I think you're going to see, and I'll talk while it's getting pulled up, is the Sweco 480. This was on a project in Ruidoso.
Oh, Tony, don't forget to unmute yourself. It muted you once it started. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the reminder. Sorry about that, guys. So you can tell it cuts across that slope fairly easily. In less slopes, you can, cut it in 1 or 2 passes, but obviously as you get steeper and you get more obstacles and rocks and materials, firmer soil, it's taking multiple passes. But just think about how many strokes, high impact strokes on your wrist that this is saving your crew from digging that massive amount of material with a machine and not a hand tool. You can bump it on to the next one. This next one you're going to see is just a couple of weeks ago here in Colorado Springs. We're building an equestrian skills course. This is their switchback.
It muted you again, Tony. I'm so sorry. GoToWebinar is wonky with videos. We apologize.
How are we doing now? Sorry. I'll try to remember that this next time. Here we are in Colorado Springs last week, cutting the trail for the equestrian skills course. You can see that this dozer is used in tandem with a Mini X below it, which has a tilting bucket on it. I feel like this in Colorado for us is a really efficient combo. You can go to the next one now, and I'll remember to unmute myself. Once again, this one kind of shows the ease of them cutting on moderate to steep side slopes, and just so much more quicker cutting in the right zones than the Mini X has been for us on a lot of our projects. And I gotta say, I love building trails with machines that don't look like trails built with machines. And despite me loving the feel of this dozer flow and the machine moving and slicing and sculpting through the earth, I had a massive epiphany back in the early 2000s. We were working in Cheyenne Mountain State Park. We had one of these infrared like thermometer things that we checked our tour cubs with a lot. And I basically was checking the dirt and it read 141 degrees. I was looking at my crew destroying these berms, big berms, and building back slope by hand. And that's when we bought our first Mini X. And at that point, I realized how stupid I had been for the last 8 or 9 years and how much money I had wasted. Not following and chasing my dozer with the Mini X. So I totally dig this dozer Mini X combo. However, I gotta say, if you can only own one piece of equipment, my choice would be a Mini X with a tilting bucket and a Mini X with a digging bucket and a hydraulic thumb. I think that's about it on that one. Let's bump to the next one. Looking for, there it is. Let's talk about the pros of the trail dozers, whether it be the mini one or whether it be the 48-inch wide ones. They're all heavy and powerful. They have moderate travel speeds. As you can see on the videos, they cut bench easily and quickly. They're super stable with their low center of gravity. Off-trail travel is also pretty decent with them unless you're going through rocks. And as long as you're not turning circles, it'll not tear up too much. They also have a tight turning radius for building climbing turns as well as switchbacks. And here's a picture of Baby Flo sculpting 30-inch wide rolling contour single track in Canyon City. As far as the cons go, they're expensive to own and operate, just like much of the equipment is. And they can't push debris very far below the trail without creating more impact. And it's sure hard to pull stuff back up on the trail with a dozer as compared to an excavator. They can't dig a borrow pit worth a hoot. Excavator is definitely your choice. They also have an extreme amount of challenges on flat slopes, gentle terrain, soft slopes. And it really is almost harder to cut a decent trail there than it is on a side slope with these dozers. They're not great or known for cutting or shaping back slopes. And the problem with the dozers that's different with the excavators, and the main crux of the difference, is that they mix your organic matter, your mineral soil, all your rocks and roots together, and sometimes that's less than ideal. They require skilled operators, as the other machines do, and they require regular maintenance and often specialized tools and shop access. This picture here is actually the ASV, and as you can see, they're using it as a loader, and they don't have a 6-way blade on it. Next. So, where do they work best? Well, obviously all machines work best in nice, gently rolling hills of loam. We know that. And where do they work the least? Bedrock. So for a dozer, really works well in 25 to 75% side slopes. Enough side slope where your materials go down the hill and don't pile up in front or on side of you. They also work really well in low to high rock content, as well as rock and mineral-based soils. They do have some limitations though. They don't function really well on high clay soils when wet, especially in flat zones, and they don't really do well at separating high organic materials from soils. As I mentioned, they're a little more challenging on gentle slopes, and on shallow or sloped bedrock, those metal tracks on the dozers can almost act like sledding tracks sliding down. That's the nice thing about the mini excavators, is they're mostly rubber tracks. When getting into extremely rocky areas or areas where we need to separate our organics from the mineral soil, we would prefer to lead with the Mini X. So let's talk about becoming a skilled operator. Number of hours. So a beginner is probably considered even at 50 to 100 hours. And whether you're a beginner that came from a farming background where you've run tractors and you have that hydraulic sixth sense, or whether it's the first machine you've ever been on, your training could range from hundreds of hours to thousands of hours before you really know how to build trail on a side slope. Zen level, I still feel like a lot of other things, is about 10,000 hours. I feel pretty blessed to have been on a number of machines over the past 40 years and found the Zen level at many points. But I tell you what I found most valuable is Spotify. Listening to music when this job is, I mean, if just like trail building, hour after hour, it gets monotonous. Luckily, it looks like Trinidad State College is going to run a mechanized trail construction class this summer of 2022, hopefully, and I'll make sure and get Candace that information so that she can advertise it on the American Trails website. Let's talk about cost. Cost of dozers. To put this in perspective, in 1994, Arrowhead Trails bought their first dozer. It was a Sweco 450. It cost $36,000. However, today, that same dozer, which is now a Sweco 480, runs $96,000 or $114,000 with a cab. The smaller micro dozer, the Sutter 300, is currently listed at $74,000. While the Sutter 500, similar to the Sweco 480, is at $95,000. As we know with the supply chain on most things, there's a lot of back order on this. Typically, these are 5 to 6 months back ordered, and obviously the prices are subject to change. They're only good for 30 days. As far as insuring your equipment, it's fairly reasonable. You're insuring them under your inland marine policy, under your general liability policy, and it's quite honestly a lot more economical than the vehicles that you drive on the highway and the road. The cost of maintenance, that's a big one. There's a huge range. Most important is how well do your folks take care of that machine. If they're busting through rocks, running too fast, your machine is going to have way more equipment. But here's what we say, is even with a machine that's 2 or 3 years old, you need to plan for at least a couple of grand. That's a couple of thousand a year per machine minimum. You need to count on replacing those tracks on a regular basis. And let's face it, running at $2,000 or $3,000 for a set of tracks minimum, that gets expensive. As far as maintenance goes, we plan on less than 100 hours of maintenance for our new machines. And on our older machines, it pretty much is the sky is the limit. Some of our older machines, we may have several hundreds of hours in the shop on them per year. Here's another question we get asked is how long or how many hours until a machine is retired? Many machines are going to be beat to heck by about 5,000 hours. However, I've seen machines and heard of machines that have operated in the 10 to 15,000 hours. And once again, this depends on the care of you with your machines, with your routine maintenance, the care of your operators, and the patience and your pocketbook. At that, I'm going to pass it over to Jed, and he's going to talk about some other dirt moving machines.
Thanks, Tony. So the other dirt movers we generally see on the trail are compact utility loaders, which could be a ride-on or walk behind and stand on machines. For many years personally, I considered myself at best a reluctant equipment operator, as my passion for trail work was really sparked by the remote backcountry technical work. That said, as I gained experience and injuries, the machine work became much more appealing. And my first piece of equipment that I invested in was a rubber tracked compact loader, and it's still one of my favorite machines. The larger ones are generally referred to as skid steers or loaders, the smaller ones as mini skid steers or mini loaders. They're really versatile. They have endless add-on attachments, such as 4-in-1 buckets, dozer blades, forks, augers, rotating grapples, leveling plates, tilt plates, power box rakes like Harley rakes, and on and on. The most popular trail building machines are probably in the mini size, which generally go up to roughly 48 inches in width, give or take. The most popular brands are Ditch Witch and Vermeer, and to a slightly lesser degree, Toro and Bobcat. And these types of machines lack the power of dozers, but they really do excel at grading and leveling, as well as loading carriers and dumpers. One key difference that I should mention between the mini versions that we generally use on the trail and some of the more standard skid steers that are usually 60 inches wide or wider, other than the obvious size, weight, and power differences, is the lack of rollover protection on the stand-on and walk-behind machines. Although they're pretty darn intuitive to use, the operator is also in a relatively exposed position. It's scarily easy, even for an experienced operator, to back into an obstacle, particularly when you're working in a tight corridor with lots of trees or boulders, or potentially tip the machine. The trade-off for that risk is having a machine with really amazing visibility on all sides and extreme ease of getting on and off the machine. It's really easy to step on, step off, as opposed to climbing into like a traditional skid steer loader with a rollover protection and full cab. With that, I guess we'll talk a little bit about compact trail excavators. Joe is really going to take over this topic, but I just wanted to mention these are some of the brands, and I'm sure there's more companies out there that make micro and mini trail excavators. We're not really promoting any particular brand. We may cite what we like to use. Personally, I don't have a lot of brand loyalty. I've currently owned 3 different excavators for 3 different companies, and I feel like they each have their own strength, because unlike the trail dozers that Tony was discussing, trail excavators the excavators we use on trails were not designed for trail use. Therefore, they all have different strengths and weaknesses. For instance, the Kubotas are highly used in the trail realm, but it's a little bit of a challenge to get a good working aftermarket thumb on them, and they don't come with a factory thumb, whereas a Yanmar machine comes with a factory thumb, but is a little bit underpowered relative to the Kubota. So they all have their pluses and minuses. And so you really need to know what you're going to be using it for and test out a bunch of the different brands to find out what's going to suit you best. for any particular application. With that, I'll pass this on to Joe to go into more detail about the excavators.
Hey, thanks, Jed. Yeah, so
Just a reminder, Joe, to unmute yourself, sorry, once it started.
this is in Perg, outside Durango there, and he's just building a landing pad. He used some debris from the top there. He built this little jump. He built that landing pad up. He's smoothing it out, make that smooth transition to that drop there. You can do the next video.
Sorry, one more time, you have to unmute yourself again.
This is a little time-lapse video. This is in Vernal, Utah. The machine in front cuts all of this initially. Has a smaller bucket. It gets through this, it hogs it. This machine here has a little bit wider bucket, so it's working the tread. It's putting a little whoop there, a little transition there, and it's working on this bank turn. So this machine right here is a Kubota U17. Uses that wider bucket to kind of sculpt and shape different transition grade reversals, working on that back slope. Like you can see, he's using that material too to kind of put back on the tread and work on that little whoop he's working on there. You can do the next slide. Yeah, you can also see that he's like, you know, he's working that tread pretty good. He's pounding that dirt in and stuff. So, all right, pros. Yeah, so these excavators, they're narrow, right? They're 4 feet wide. The tracks go in and out, which is really nice using hydraulics. A lot of them have hydraulic thumbs, which is really nice for pulling out big stumps, large organic material. They're extremely well and proficient at moving organic material, hogging through trail, sculpting trail. And yeah, like you saw in the video earlier, it's good to use that material. You can drive the track back and forth. It does move in 360 position, so the hub and the cab moves all the way around. And you do have a variety of attachments. There's a bunch of different mods. You have a ripper tooth, which is a really big tooth that sits on the front of the boom. You take the bucket off. And that's really good for breaking up extremely hard material. And then you have the thumb, which I talked about earlier. That thumb, you can kind of see it in this photo. It initially sits on the boom. And when I talk about the boom is the arm of the front of the cab. The cab is what you sit in, right? So it sits above the bucket. It's used with a hydraulic cylinder, and it compresses down, and that's how you can snatch and hold on and grab on to stumps and big rocks and stuff like that. The post hole auger, that's pretty obvious. That also attaches to the front of the boom. That's to dig big old holes to put, you know, if you're building fence or anything like that. And turbo kits. So some of these machines will not have a turbo installed. They have very little to no horsepower, like 20 horsepower. When you're working at 11,000 feet, these do not run very well. So they do make turbo kits to get some extra oxygen into the engine there. Teeth, there's different teeth you can get for the buckets. The buckets alone, there's wider buckets, there's graded buckets. The graded buckets are pretty nice. They have slits inside the bucket, and you can kind of shift through dirt and material. And yeah, in muddy conditions and a bunch of rough conditions, these machines can do a lot. I mean, you have 2 big rubber tracks, you have the boom. I've seen some of our operators climb up some extremely steep grades just using the boom. and it like going downgrade and upgrade, and it's extremely impressive. So yeah, the cons, they're expensive. They cost a lot, and it's expensive to train a new operator. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, stuff that goes into that, and I'll touch in another slide soon. They are relatively light. I think they weigh like 1.2 tons. And like I said, the U17 is about 20 horsepower. I think the U27 is, I don't know, like 20.8. It's a little bit stronger. They do have a higher center of gravity, so they become less stable and really weird grade levels. They're more complicated to operate. There's multiple sticks. It's all hydraulically ran. You have 2 sticks. You have twin sticks. You also have foot paddles. The twin sticks can also have different buttons that engage different attachments on the machine. So yeah, it takes quite a bit of skill to run one of these things. Slower production rates by digging instead of pushing, and sculpting is huge. I mean, yeah, you can sculpt with it and stuff can, you know, you can work with this machine, but ultimately they do break down, they do slow production. And on that note, I mean, with the exposed hoses and cylinders, I think on a Kubota boom, you have 3 or 4 cylinders on the boom, and a ton of hydraulic hoses. I mean, you're going to rip them off. You're in tight, narrow corridors sometimes with working on single tracks. And yeah, there's that potential of ripping off a hose. They are not designed to work on trails. I reference Kubota a lot because that's our entire fleet right now. So I know them very well, but they made a trail specific Kubota U17. It's like their trail edition. It's the exact same machine. We work these machines extremely hard. I mean, they work 10 hours a day in crazy terrain at different elevations. They're just not built for that. They're not built to be starved of oxygen and run extremely hard. So yeah, and I'll touch a base on the required operators and the regular maintenance in this. Yeah, so best train, like Tony mentioned, rolling hills, flat spots, you know, building bike parks, that's where it's at, you know. It's fun. You don't have to worry too much. You don't have to worry about falling off a cliff or dealing with some weird rain happening and mud and different effects and sliding off a hill or a mountainside. So yeah, flat terrain's where it's at. Yeah, limitations. Like I said earlier, they're very low in horsepower. The minute you get it at a higher elevation, they're even worse. Transporting these guys to a site, oh man. Yeah, it's the plunge taught us a lot, but I mean, when you have to transport a machine, you know, 3-4 miles in, and then track a U17, another 6 miles in, going, I don't know, 10 miles an hour, it takes all day. It's a project in itself, and they are also not built for that. And yeah, regular breakdowns and field repairs. It happens more than we would like, but it's mechanical, right? So if it moves and parts move, stuff is going to break, and especially if you're in tight, narrow areas. So becoming a skilled operator. Yeah, I was thinking about this one for a while. I think level of experience to even sit in that chair, you need to touch a tool first. You have to have respect for hand built, in my opinion. I think learning backsloping, tread, downslope, working with duff, making a trail look like it's been there for 100 years, understanding the flow of trail, the left, rights, up and downs, the holy trinity, like our boss likes to say, of trail. You want flow, right? And you need to understand flow. So that's our biggest thing is like once you understand flow, then we sit you in a seat. And it's I would give it a year of like actual hand built and see if you have the potential, and then a year as an operator. So 250 hours to become like a base operator and understand your surroundings and trail flow and your machine, understanding the machine, and understanding like if something goes wrong, knowing how to get the machine out, knowing how to fix certain things, because I'm not always on the field, and these operators need to understand that stuff as well. Yeah, cost of a new machine. So for Kubotas, I mean, right now it's kind of weird because of COVID. I think you can only buy one machine at a time each month, because a lot of these machines are manufactured not here. So Kubota is manufactured in Japan. So cost of a new machine's anywhere from, for Mini X 32 to 40K. Cost to insure varies on how new the machine is. Yeah, cost of maintenance is, I did the annual report for next year. It's probably 250K to run our entire fleet, and that's just general maintenance. That's not big repairs. And so it's about 7K a machine a year. So yeah, it costs a lot. And hours of maintenance, I can't even put a number on that because between myself and other operators doing what they can, it's a lot. And then how many hours? Oh, sorry. How many hours does a machine last? I think our U17, the machine lasts we have one U17 that lasted 4,000 hours, and I think we're retiring it. So, yeah. All right, back to you, Jed.
Great. Thank you, Joe. So Joe and Tony offered a great review of how traditional and bike optimized single track mechanized trails are constructed. Sort of on the other side of the trail spectrum are multi-use gravel surface trails, which have really been quickly gaining in popularity. Accessible trails, family-friendly bike trails, paths that link communities and neighborhoods, all fall into this category. And now people are taking that model and pushing it farther into the backcountry as well. They're generally pretty darn equipment intensive. So it seemed pertinent to give an overview of some of the machines that we use to build this type of trail. So in this next video, I'll introduce the trail we're building to give you a little background, and then review the machines we're using to construct it. You might want to turn your volume up a little bit because we did all the audio in the field. So you can take.
All right, hey everybody. Jed Talbot here from OBP Trailworks. We're going to take a look at the machines we have that we're using to build this trail here in Camden, Maine. It's called Round the Mountain Trail. Before we talk about the machines, I'll give a little background about the trail so you know why we're using the machines that we are using to construct this trail. We will have, by the end of this week, about 5.5 miles constructed of 6 to 8 foot wide gravel trail. It's a multi-use trail for hikers and bikers, some Nordic skiing in the winter and fat biking as well. And this trail is going to eventually circumnavigate Ragged Mountain, which will start and end sort of at the Camden Snow Bowl, which is a ski area and links to about 25 miles of mountain biking trails. Ragged Mountain's a pretty rugged peak. It's hard to see from here, but it's a bald summit with some pretty serious ledges. So actually, combined with the coastal storms, we get a tremendous amount of water on this trail, which is why we have to use the type of equipment we're using and why we have to bring in as much aggregate and bridging as we have. So we'll get to the machines that are involved with constructing this trail. The one we have in the lead, we've roughed our excavation all the way in to a point where we've turned around and are now working our way back out. So the bigger machine, bigger excavator, did the rough excavation, and now we're working our way back out, and we've got cute little Tippy here, which is our 4,000-pound Yanmar mini excavator. That's doing a little bit more of the detail work. It's tracking off-trail, doing some of the off-trail drainage, cleaning up the berms, and it's kind of leading the charge as we work our way out of this mud pit that will soon be a sustainable gravel surface trail. One of the really nice things about this Yanmar is we call it Tippy affectionately. It is a little bit tippy, but generally only when we retract the tracks. So it has a variable width. Right now the tracks are at 49 inches, but if you want to fire it up, Nate will show you how you can lift the machine and then the tracks will squeeze into about 39 inches. Okay, so now we're going to meet our crawler carriers, also called track dumps. These are all about 5 feet wide. We have 3 of them. They all serve slightly different functions. And they've been doing the lion's share of the work here, hauling in aggregate to this trail. We will have pulled in, by the end of this week, these guys will probably have hauled close to 12 million pounds of gravel in on this trail alone. Gravel rock. That's excluding bridges. So this one we affectionately known as CC Orange or CC Stable. It's the oldest one out of the group, and its tracks are a little longer, and its bed is a little bit longer, so it carries a little bit more. It's a little more stable, but it's absolutely no frills. The operator station doesn't pivot. The dump bed doesn't pivot. It's kind of an old dinosaur, but it is actually kind of a favorite of the crew because it is so stable relative to the newer models. All right, so now we have CC Yellow, also known as CC Squirrely. This is the newest machine of the bunch. It's got a rotating operator station, so you never have to turn it around. You can face one direction or the other direction. It's a little bit smaller than the next one we're going to see, but they're all about 5 feet wide, give or take a couple inches. They all weigh roughly 5,500 pounds, give or take a few pounds. It can carry between 5,500 and 6,000 pounds, or about 2 yards capacity on each machine. I like this box style, but you can get this exact same machine in the tub style that we'll see on our next crawler carrier. Okay, so this is our third track dump. It's Candycom S25A. A lot of trail builders have this particular machine. It's pretty bulletproof. This is the tub style body, so not only the operator station pivots, but the body of the machine pivots as well, so you can dump 180 degrees and 90 degrees to each side, which David will show right now. All right, so now we've got to the part of the trail we're actually dropping some top coat, some surfacing aggregate. After the crawler carriers drop, we've got the bigger Kubota that is coming through and smoothing, followed by smaller machines and hand workers. One of the things that sets this Kubota apart from other types of equipment, it's about a 10,000 pound machine. It's a 5-ton mini excavator, but it's got the 6-way blade. So the blade will actually tilt to the left, into the right, which is fairly common, but it can also cut grades. Up to, I think it's about 10%, but you can repeatedly cut ditches and outslopes, which is really, really nice. Particularly, this does a great job working our way up through the aggregate. It also really helps the machine be more stable when you're in rocky areas. I'm sure some people that are excavator operators be to that point where that blade only touches on one corner and you're rocking back and forth. Well, now with this machine, you can tip it and be a lot more stable during the excavation process as well. This is also a little over 5 feet wide. So now we have our little mini skid steers that are helping doing some of the back dragging of the top coat before we do our final compaction. We have here a Cormidi C1500. And we also over here have a ditch witch, SK750. We also have an SK755 on site. I'm not going to talk too much about the ditch witches because I think most people are familiar with them. This machine is a little bit unique. It's an Italian-made machine. What sets it apart from other machines are a few different things. First of all, it's modular. So this body will actually come off. You can put jacks in and lift this off, and then you can basically make this a mini skid steer or a concrete mixer. There's other things you can add on the top of this. Right now we have it set up with a pivoting skip dump, so that's also self-loading. So what's nice about this setup right here is we've got a blade in the front, a bucket that can back drag, it can load itself, and this also pivots and dumps. And Josh will show you how that works. When we get to the compaction process, we've got a double drum roller, a Wacker-Neuson RD12. It's a double drum vibratory roller. You can either roll with just the weight of it. You can also make it vibrate. You can also add some ballast to increase the weight of it a little bit. It works really, really well. And then for compacting smaller areas and sometimes the edging, even sometimes a little bit on the organic as well, we have a simple plate compactor. I think it's a 1550, also made by Wacker-Neuson. So between these two piece of compacting equipment, you end up with a surface that's pretty good after, as long as there's been some moisture added to the aggregate. We roll it, usually anywhere between 3 and 5 times, and you have a pretty stable surface after that. That brings us to our loaders, our skid steer, which we have usually in the yard. It's loading the track dumps full of aggregate. This is an ASV Positrack RT50. This is a new addition to our fleet. It just replaced an older RD60 that I've had for about 17 years. I love these ASVs because the undercarriage is a smoother ride than you'll find on any other compact track loader or CTL machine. And this is about 60 inches wide. It loads the track dumps really well. It takes care of the yard, the stock yard. It back drags, it can do road maintenance, and we have a whole slew of attachments that go on the front of it, including rotating grapples, 4-in-1 buckets, augers, etc. It's a really nice machine. All right, so the final piece of equipment we're going to talk about is our John Deere Gator 825i. We don't use this for trail construction very much, but it's really handy to have for maintenance, for bringing tools in, etc. It's about 61 inches wide, so it's in that same 5-foot range to fit across our bridges and access our whole 6-foot wide trail. It also has, we installed a hydraulic dump kit, so it will dump 1,500 pounds. So if you have to bring small amounts of material a little ways deeper or farther along the trail, it can get there pretty quickly. It's not something we use every day, and it's certainly not something we use for the majority of the construction, but it's a really handy tool nonetheless. We also have a Japanese mini truck that has a 6-foot bed that ours doesn't dump. Those are also really nice. They're a little bit narrower and can go on even narrower trails than what this machine can. Overall, it's a pretty handy machine. It'll go up to about 45 miles per hour if you were so inclined, but we generally keep it in low gear. It's got 4-wheel drive, 2-wheel drive, and a differential lock as well as a winch on the front if after all that you still get stuck.
All right, thanks for sitting through that, you guys. This is just a quick little time lapse of the last section of trail that we built over there around the mountain. We'll be back next year. So I just wanted to, one thing we didn't focus too much on during our presentation is the need for quality hand finishing on almost all machine built trails. You can see that there's a lot of people working that are actually swinging real tangible hand tools, as much or more as the machine operators. And sorry, I'm gonna talk over the sound of the machine. There we go. There's really no substitute for methodical handwork, from cutting the corridor to proper pruning techniques to hand finishing. So, we do want to emphasize the machines are wonderful. They really help reduce the amount of labor that we have to construct a trail. They certainly are not the end all. You still need people on the ground doing a lot of the naturalization, hand finishing, the corridor clearing, etc. With that, I believe it wraps up our presentation. We don't have a ton of time for questions, but we will get to your questions that we cannot answer now. We'll answer via email.
Great. Well, I'll just ask, I've been reading through the questions and I have a few that we'll try to cover. One, Jed, I was going to start with you, and this was questions from both Christopher and Mike, just asking to compare the cost of hand-built trail versus machine-built trail. And then specifically, does the cost of the efficiency of using machines kind of allay the issue of how expensive they are?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's far-reaching question because a lot of it has to do with the terrain and the width of trail, right? I've just been laying out trail the last couple of days here in Maine where we've been trying to battle that exact same thing. Okay, like what's it going to cost to build? Is it going to be less expensive to build by hand or with machine? And on these trails we've been looking at, yesterday we decided it's going to be better to do it by machine. The day before, the other trail we're going to build it by hand. It's highly variable, but I would say the steeper the side slopes, the rockier the terrain, the more stumps that need to get pulled push you into, and the wider the trail, push you into that mechanized realm of being more efficient cost-wise. If you're looking for a very simple rustic trail, or perhaps something that has a lot of structures involved where you won't be able to track machines over, a lot of staircases, something like that, then hand built might be more cost efficient. It really depends on the terrain.
Great.
I think a point to make here too is the impact zone of trail construction is not necessarily due to hand built versus machine built. It's really due to the width and the amount of spoils that you have to get rid of. Because let's face it, even with a micro excavator, you can build a super nice little 18 to 24 inch wide trail and have it super clean.
So Tony, that kind of brings us into the next question that I was going to pass on to you from John about what is the best practice using a dozer, and I guess also using an excavator, to keep the spoils from being deposited next to the trail and having the trail looking natural in the forest.
Yeah, that's real key. And I would say the answer to that is having that tilted bucket. When you have that tilting bucket, you can literally reach down there and gently scrape across the existing surface, pull that stuff back up onto the trail. I know also with swivel buckets, or if you change your bucket around to where it points forward, you can move your excavator in a forward direction, digging, and then rotating around 180 degrees and then loading that into a track carrier and then carrying it off site if your client's requiring essentially a full clean type of construction.
Great. Joe, I have a question for you from Pauline. And she asked, do you prefer to build the trail from the trailhead back to the far end of the job, or start the far end of the job back towards the trailhead, just in terms of logistics and machinery?
Yeah. So that's a super good question. It just depends. It depends where we can access the trail. Sometimes it's, we're starting at the start point, ending, or we're going uphill. It really just depends on where the site's at. I referenced the Palisade plunge, but the plunge was very remote, and we would start where we thought we were comfortable starting. It varies from project to project.
So Joe, I have another question for you. Do you know if any of the machines that we've talked about will pass the Buy America steel requirements for the federal RTP program, or do any of you know that?
I'm not sure on that one.
Never
I
heard
can
of it.
speak to that. I can speak to that. Currently, the only machine that I know of that passes all of the Buy America criteria for machines that could be used with RTP recreational trail program funds would be the Tucker Snowcat snow grooming machine. There isn't a single other trail machine out there that currently sources all of its steel domestically and has enough of the machine built in the United States entirely to pass the criteria.
Thanks, Jed. So Jed, I have another question for you. What size Mini X would you recommend if an organization could only have one for building trail in the Northeast?
Again, not sure what type of trail you're building. If you're building single track trail, honestly, those Kubota U17s or Kubota, I don't mind the ones with a slightly bigger tail that don't have the zero radius tail swing. So that would be the KX018, I believe. The 4,000-pound mini excavators with the retractable tracks, similar to the small Yanmar that was shown on the video, is probably going to be your best go-to. You're going to build, they're pretty powerful, and you can build stuff that's wider. And you can also build, it can go anywhere from 24 to 36 inches up to 5 foot with a machine of that size. It is lacking the power of the bigger machines, but most people I know go with that 2-ton machine as their first mini excavator, generally speaking.
I think regardless of what machine that you choose to use on your project, you need to learn how to use a clinometer first.
All right, I think we could end on that. Candace, I'll pass it off to you. I think we have 2 minutes left.
And I remember actually doing a webinar with Tony long ago with the clinometer. So awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. The slide that you guys see here is the resources slide that will be emailed to all attendees in the follow-up email I send with a link to the recording, as well as the closed caption transcript. So you can expect that from me within 1 to 3 business days after I gather all of the materials together. And as Aaron had mentioned, we do have many more questions that we were not able to address due to time constraints. So I will work with the presenters to answer your questions in writing, and I will send a follow-up email with all of the Q&A to all of the attendees, as well as add to the website when ready. But you are also welcome to email the presenters yourself in the meantime if you would like a quicker answer. So again, I want to thank the Professional TrailBuilders Association, as well as the Federal Highway Administration for making this webinar free to everyone. A big thank you again to all of the presenters of today's webinar. And if you are enjoying these webinars, please consider donating as little as $5 by texting I'm for Trails to 44321. Your donation will go to the Trail Fund, which is a program of American Trails, and it helps enable us to build a fund dedicated to maintaining and enhancing America's trails through maintenance, research, and stewardship training projects. And as I've mentioned in previous months, we will be opening up applications to apply for funding for your projects in early 2022. So details are online on our website, americantrails.org. You can also get to it at thetrailfund.org, as well as emailing us at trailfund@americantrails.org if you want to be put on the list to be notified once that becomes available. But it's a new grant program that we have, and we're pretty excited about that. And lastly, we will select a couple people who donated immediately following this webinar to receive our new color Trail Boss mug as a thank you. So thank you again to everyone for attending. I do note some upcoming webinars that we have going on for the remainder of the year that you can register now for free. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and happy trails.